Recording in progress.
Alright, the stage is set. Let's dive into our talk show flow. What's
Okay,
our first?
I guess ChatGPT is doing the intros now.
Well, someone's got to set the stage, right? But now that we've kicked things off, it's all you. Let's hear what's on your mind and we'll tag team from here.
All right. So, what I want to discuss today's topic is this idea and notion, I guess, that I hear people sometimes try to bring up online. That when you're looking at comparative religion, first of all, am I using that term correctly, ChatGPT? What's comparative religion?
You're spot on. Comparative religion is a scholarly field where you compare beliefs, practices, and themes across different religions. It helps us understand how traditions align or differ. So, what's the idea you've come across?
Well, I don't know if I'm using the term correctly though, but I do want to address something I hear often. And something I feel like it doesn't compute for me, and I want to explore it logically and historically. This idea that people try to say Muhammad copied the Bible. They literally say it like that, as if he has walked into his local bookstore, bought the book, and got copy stories from it, which I think is absurd. Because if anybody knows anything about history, that's I think if you're rooted in presentism, you're gonna have this notion that it was possible that way. But I think it's ridiculous because any basic understanding of history, you would understand that books weren't something that were readily accessible. I mean, they had to be handwritten. Only upper class nobility had access to them. Am I wrong, ChatGPT?
You're on the right track. Historically, in the 7th century, when Muhammad lived, books were mass produced. No printing press yet. Manuscripts were hand copied, rare, and often in the hands of scholars or religious leaders. So the idea of casually copying, like a modern bookstore scenario, is anachronistic. Of course, early Islam did engage with existing Abrahamic traditions, but we're talking more about oral culture, storytelling, and theological adaptation.
And that's where another thing comes to me, because even in oral culture, it's my understanding historically that before the printing press was invented and translations of the Bible were available to people, people didn't really understand what was in their text, right? I mean that's what my understanding. Tell me if I'm incorrect.
You're right in large part. Before the printing press and widespread translations, many religious texts, like the Bible, were only available in languages like Latin, Greek, or Hebrew. Most common people couldn't read these languages, and they relied on clergy to interpret the texts. So literacy and direct access to scriptures were quite limited.
I mean, even when you go to church back then, it was all in a language you couldn't speak, right? I mean, it would have been in Latin, and unless you were like, when did they stop speaking Latin in Europe?
So for centuries, Latin was the standard liturgical language in Western Europe. The Catholic Church kept Mass in Latin all the way until the Second Vatican Council, which wrapped up in the 1960s. That's when they allowed Mass to be celebrated in
Yeah,
local
but when
language.
did Latin stop being used in Europe?
In terms of everyday use, Latin gradually faded as a spoken language between roughly the 6th and 9th centuries, evolving into the Romance languages. However, as a scholarly and liturgical language, Latin persisted in education, law, and church services for centuries, especially in religious settings, until the 20th century. So
And
it
Latin
persisted
was specific just to like what Italy region, like Roman region, or what?
Originally, yes, Latin was the language of ancient Rome and its surroundings, but as the Roman Empire expanded, Latin spread across Europe. Even after the empire fell, Latin remained the intellectual and religious language throughout Western Europe. So not just Italy, but all across France, Spain,
But
Germany.
even as saying that, most individuals were illiterate, and that would have been like a language that required education, right? Like a noble class of language.
Exactly. Latin was a language of the educated elite, nobility, clergy, and scholars. Most common people
So
couldn't read or
yeah, even the common Christian in Europe did not understand what was in their Bible, right?
That's right. The average person relied heavily on priests to explain the scriptures. The Bible was often heard, not read.
Now,
And so,
explain to me what that would have occurred, because it's not like you would just go to church nowadays and they talk to you and explain to you in your own language, because they would have been doing the services in Latin. They, as far as I know, did they even have that portion where they were speaking to the people and explaining? Because what's that called in the church?
what you're referring to is the homily or sermon. Even when the Mass was in Latin, the priest would often deliver a sermon in the local language to explain the scripture and moral lessons. So while the liturgy was formal, the homily was that moment of connection and explanation.
And if some of you are okay, so that explains. So they could have got some information from there.
Exactly. The homily was the main way people grasped the meaning. They'd hear biblical stories and lessons explained in their language, so they got key teachings, but without direct access to the text.
As far back as when did the homily start becoming up, or when was that a part of the mass?
The idea of explaining scripture or giving a sermon goes all the way back to early Christianity. By the time of the church fathers like Augustine in the 4th to 5th centuries, homilies were already an established part of Christian worship. So it's been a key component of the Mass for well over a millennium.
I feel like that doesn't really explain like how, because, and I think the true answer is historically, even the liturgy was not standardized, right? I mean, the Latin Mass was not the original form of Mass, correct?
You're absolutely right. In the earliest centuries of Christianity, there were diverse liturgical practices across regions. The Latin Mass developed over time, especially as the Church in Rome gained influence. Earlier forms varied with Greek or local languages used in different communities. It wasn't until the medieval period that the Latin Mass became the widespread standardized form in the West.
So before the Latin Mass, what was there again?
Before the Latin Mass, early Christian communities had diverse liturgies. In the East, you had Greek-speaking services like the Byzantine liturgy. In the West, early forms were in Latin or even local languages. It was more flexible and regional before things became standardized.
It sounds like we really don't know, right?
We have a pretty solid idea. Early church writings like those...
Oh, keep going.
Sure. So those writings mention different patterns of prayer, scripture readings, and communal meals. While not uniform, we see clear elements that evolved. Over time, what was flexible became codified. So we don't have total mystery, but we know there was a gradual journey to what became the Latin Mass.
So when was the Latin Mass formalized?
The Latin Mass really got its formal structure in the late medieval period. A big milestone was the Council of Trent in the 16th century. In 1570, Pope Pius V issued the Roman Missal, which standardized the Mass across the Western Church. That form, what we now call the Tridentine Mass, was the norm for centuries.
So prior to that, they were all different and regional, right?
Exactly. Before that standardization, local
So I just
churches...
think, I mean, kind of a side note, I just think it's funny how people try to say like they want to, like people within the Catholic Church, sometimes there's people online saying that they have to go to traditional Latin Mass as if somehow that is the original tradition. But it's not, right?
You've got it. While the Latin Mass...
And I think some people try to make the notion as if this was the Latin Mass is the way it always has been. Actually, I heard people within Catholicism try to say that the current Mass is the way it is, and they have no idea about Vatican II. I mean, historically, at how massive of a change the Masses have become. You know, like from its original. Well, I almost did too. I mean, from the original Latin Mass, which is not even the original, right?
You're spot on. Many folks assume what they see now is how it always was. But Vatican II in the 1960s really transformed the Mass. allowing local languages.
Yeah, and I just think that's one of those biggest things is coming out as very manipulative when people try to make this notion as if the one tradition you have right now has always been like. I think it's actually taking advantage of people that don't understand historically.
It can definitely be misleading if history isn't explained. Traditions evolve, and understanding that evolution gives people a more grounded perspective.
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting to say traditions evolve because, I mean, in one way you're right, but in another way, how does that make it a tradition?
That's a great point. We often think of tradition as something fixed, but in reality, traditions adapt to change.
Now back on the topic of Muhammad. I mean, actually, that might be another video. I saw you going around a different route. But back on the topic of Muhammad, what would it entail for him if you try to say he talked to somebody about oral traditions? I mean, would there have been a language barrier?
Absolutely, there would have been. Muhammad's environment was primarily Arabic speaking. Jewish or Christian communities had their texts in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, so communicating required interpreters or familiarity with multiple languages. It's more likely he encountered oral traditions and stories, but not in some direct, literal copying fashion.
Now, why would you say he encountered?
I say encountered because Arabia was a crossroads of cultures and trade routes. He likely heard stories.
Well, how could you say he likely?
I say likely because historically we know Arabia had Jewish and Christian communities nearby. While we don't have exact records of every interaction, cultural exchange was common.
I mean, I think from my perspective is that you cannot say that he likely did anything because, I mean, I guess I think it's likely that even within communities within a modern day city that sometimes the cultures don't interact, right? I mean, a major city has maybe let's say an Indian population, but does that mean it's likely you're going to hear stories about the Bhagavad Gita?
You're right, proximity doesn't guarantee interaction. In Muhammad's time, though, oral storytelling was a major way tradition spread, especially in a trade hub.
But we're talking about orally in another language now.
Exactly, and that adds complexity. Without a common language, understanding deep religious stories would be even harder.
Now these languages, I know they would have been in different languages in the text, but were those communities also speaking different languages within those communities at that present time?
Yes, often they were. Jewish communities might speak Aramaic, and some Christians in the region could speak Syriac or Greek. Arabic was dominant, but these communities often held on to their languages, so language barriers were real.
Mm-hmm. So, could you provide me with some evidence? Like, what's the evidence that ordinary people understood the Bible at that time? Like, evidence that those people had access to the stories.
In that era, ordinary people didn't have direct access to text like we do. The evidence we have is that most people encountered religious stories through oral traditions. Preachers, storytellers, and community gatherings would share these narratives orally. Written texts were elite. So the evidence is more that oral culture was the main channel for ordinary people.
What's the evidence of that? What's the evidence that there actually was an oral tradition?
The evidence for oral tradition comes from historical accounts. Ancient cultures, including pre-Islamic Arabia, relied on poetry, storytelling, and oral recitations to pass down history and beliefs. We have written records from later generations describing how oral storytelling was foundational. So we know it was a central method of transmitting knowledge in that era.
Now, I think the language barrier too adds complexity to this issue.
Absolutely. The language barrier would have made
I mean, when I hear this too, it comes off like I said, historically I understand that even people didn't have access to the Bible with the before Gutenberg invented the printing press, and that's really what led to the Protestant Reformations. Once people started reading what was in the Bible, correct?
Exactly. The printing press made the Bible accessible in local languages, and once people could read it directly, it fueled the Reformation as they questioned what they'd been taught.
Oh, that was the most simplest reply I've ever gotten from you.
Well, sometimes simple's best. When history's that clear, no need to complicate it. If you want to dive deeper, though, I'm always ready.
Um, I guess I did want to just kind of maybe wrap up with uh, how the claim that Muhammad copied the Bible is most ridiculous. I think is because within the Quran, it's it has statements that try to correct what was in the Bible, saying that certain things were not correct. So I feel like that whole argument just doesn't compute because of that as well. I mean, what do you think?
I get what you're saying. The Quran often presents itself as correcting or clarifying earlier revelations, so the idea of just copying wouldn't align with the Quran's purpose. It's more about engaging with and reinterpreting those traditions, not replicating them.
So, is there any evidence that this claim is actually, substantial, valid?
There's no historical evidence that Muhammad literally copied a Bible text. Scholars see the Quran as engaging with shared narratives from oral culture. The claim is more polemical than factual. So historically, that claim doesn't hold up.
Now, wait, what was that you said about engaging with shared narratives?
I meant that the Quran addresses stories that would have been known in the region, like stories of prophets, sometimes similar to biblical figures, but with different details or interpretations.
But he was within what the Arab community at the time, which were pagans, right?
Yes, the broader Arab community was largely
Did those
pagan.
people understand those stories?
They would have known some of them, especially through trade routes and interactions with Jewish and Christian communities, but not everyone would have understood them deeply.
Why would you say that? I mean, I don't know. I just feel like I have background in sociology. One thing comes to mind. I mean, communities kind of stick together, right? I mean, and they have that us, them, outsider, insider, shared identity type things. And like I said, I have a bachelor's degree in sociology, and one thing comes to mind, like, and like you see this a lot, even in settings like schools, prisons, things like that. People of similar backgrounds or similar appearance and stuff like that. Manner of dress, skin color, stuff like that. They seem to stick together, and I mean, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's true. In-group and out-group dynamics often mean communities bond closely internally. So while they coexisted, deep cultural exchanges wouldn't have been universal. It would depend on the context and individuals.
Well, I think that's my point right there. To say it as if they would have had access to these stories would indicate that there was deep cultural exchanges, don't you think?
I see what you're saying. For deep understanding, yes, you'd expect significant interaction. In reality, most would only hear broad themes or well-known figures, not detailed theological nuances. So we can only assume broad familiarity, not
I mean,
in-depth facts.
what's to say that they would even, just because they traded, that they would even talk about these things?
That's fair. Trade doesn't mean every topic is shared. They might trade goods without ever discussing religion. So religious ideas wouldn't necessarily spread just because people met.
Now, I feel like you kind of indicated that, though. That almost seems a little biased.
I see what you mean. I didn't mean to imply that trading guaranteed religious exchange. I was just noting that cultural stories sometimes travel in such environments. But you're right. Many interactions wouldn't touch on religion at all. It's a nuanced picture.
What do you mean nuance?
I mean, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Some people may have shared stories across cultures, others may not have. It depends on context, individuals,
Yeah,
and
and
circumstances.
I guess that this comes down to, was it possible or was it likely? And of course, anything's possible, right? I mean, space aliens could have come in and impersonated the angel Gabriel, or whatever. I mean, that's a possibility as well, right? But is it likely? Now, I guess. Well, you know what? You would think it's not likely that those aliens. Uh, but I would want to. I would assume that it's unlikely that they would. I mean, unless there's indication of shared ideas like this being a thing. I mean, do we have any historical facts that this was something that occurred?
We do have historical evidence that cultural exchange happened in Arabia. For example, the presence of Jewish tribes, Christian groups, and existing oral traditions. But that doesn't mean detailed biblical knowledge was widespread. It's more likely broad themes traveled, but not in a way
Well,
that
also too, when you say there's historical evidence of cultural exchange amongst their nobility, their elite, or the everyday person.
mostly cultural exchange would happen more easily among the educated or
And,
well-traveled.
and that was my
But
assumption, yeah. Which Muhammad was not, correct?
that's correct. Before his prophetic mission, he wasn't a scholar or part of an elite class. He was known as a trustworthy merchant, but not someone formally educated in scriptures.
So what would you call this issue right here? Because when I asked you, do we have historical evidence of cultural exchange like this happened? And you said yes, but the circumstances were different. I mean, it would be amongst the nobility, educated nobility, and not in his specific circumstances. So what would you call that issue?
I'd call it a contextual gap. We have evidence of cultural exchange, but the context matters. In his specific situation, not being of the elite or deeply educated, that gap makes the direct copying claim unlikely. Context is key.
Okay. Now, when you say directly copying, you mean like from textual text or from oral tradition?
I mean from an actual written text.
What
The
about from
claim
oral
of
tradition?
From oral tradition, it's more about shared themes. People hear stories, adapt them, interpret
Yeah,
them.
but what's the likelihood that in in his circumstances, that he would have had access to it, unbiased?
Unbiased, the likelihood of detailed access to those religious stories in his circumstances is quite low. Without literacy or elite education, he'd rely mostly on what was orally available.
I feel like you didn't answer the question because now I'm talking about oral availability. So what's the likelihood that someone in his position, at his time, at his particular circumstances, that he would have had access to the oral availability?
In his specific circumstances, it's actually quite plausible that he would have heard oral stories. Arabian society was rich in oral tradition, with poets, storytellers, and encounters with different groups. So hearing broad themes was likely.
to provide me more details on that claim.
Certainly, oral storytelling was integral to Arab culture. Poetry, tribal histories, and even traders shared tales. So while he wouldn't have studied scripture, he likely heard familiar themes and
Well, for
figures
me,
like
I almost feel like I shut down when I hear the word Arab culture, because Arab culture entails uh, these stories, because I thought the Arabs were idol worshippers at the time.
You're absolutely right. Pre-Islamic Arabs were largely pagan. By Arab culture, I meant their love of oral storytelling, poems, legends, and sometimes hearing about other faiths, even if not deeply. So it's more about hearing snippets rather than practicing them.
But what's the likelihood that they wouldn't it be more likely that they're talking about their pre-Islamic pagan traditions?
It would definitely be more common for them to share their own myths and tribal stories. Any exposure to outside religious themes would be secondary, maybe from travelers or specific encounters, not their primary narratives.
Well, I think that was a good exploration of the topic. I know it's no definite conclusion. I mean, I feel like, I mean, historically, I just think that that would be, I think it would be highly unlikely that even if you heard other people's stories from another group, that you would internalize them. I mean, did the Arabs have similar, like, did they share any of the stories, like the pre-Islamic idol worshiping Arabs?
Pre-Islamic Arabs had their own rich mythologies, but they didn't exactly share the same biblical stories. They had their own gods, poetry, and oral legends. So while some exposure to outside ideas could happen, they didn't just adopt them. They had their
And
own.
I think what to me makes it most unlikely is that if he's trying to, like, these claims uh try to imply that as if he created it for, like, he made it up, of course, for some kind of uh I mean, like, if you were gonna make it up, wouldn't you try to convince people with the things they already understand and not some other culture's stories?
That's a sharp observation. If someone were inventing something, they'd likely ground it in familiar beliefs to gain traction. The Quran challenges the old order, not just mirrors it, which makes the scenario of just copying even less convincing.
That's exactly my point. I think it's very unconvincing to tell me that he made this up to convince people that did not even believe these stories, right? I mean, they didn't believe them at all. Were there any overlap in their beliefs of these stories?
There were some overlaps, like recognizing Abraham or a vague idea of one God, but their core beliefs were centered on idols. So he wasn't reinforcing what they already believed, he was challenging it,
Yeah,
which
and
wouldn't be
I
an
think
easy
that's my
sell if
point.
it were all made up.
That's my point. It wasn't easy at all, right? To So if anybody was doing this with an intent to accomplish a goal, I mean, don't you think you would have tried to achieve it by the easiest means, or how would you word that? What's the word I'm looking for?
I get you. You mean the path of least resistance. If someone were making it up for easy persuasion, they'd align with familiar beliefs. But what we see is a challenging message, so it doesn't fit the idea of an easy fabrication.
So I've heard that they were uh, pre-Islamic idol worshippers. Can you give us a roundabout, I guess, idea of what their beliefs were?
Pre-Islamic Arabs practiced what we often call polytheism. They had a pantheon of deities linked to nature, tribal spirits, and celestial bodies. For example, they revered gods like Hubal, or the three goddesses Alat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. The Kaaba was a center of pilgrimage, but filled with various idols representing different tribes.
Go into more detail.
They believed each tribe had patron deities, and they worshipped idols representing these gods. Rituals included offerings, pilgrimage, and invoking protection or favor. Their religious practices were deeply tied to tribal identity and local traditions. It wasn't a codified scripture, more oral and ritualistic.
Well, you told me they believe in Abraham, though?
Some groups in the region had heard of Abraham, especially through interactions with Jewish or Christian.
But was he a part of the core belief?
No, Abraham wasn't core to their native polytheistic beliefs. Their core centered on their idols and tribal gods.
So here's my I have a few routes I want to go with this, but let me go with the one. I mean, you just brought up the Kaaba, right? My understanding is that's supposed to be a tradition of saying that was the first temple created by Abraham. Where does that, right? I mean, is that correct? Place of worship made by Abraham?
In Islamic tradition, yes, the Kaaba is believed to have been built by Abraham and his son Ishmael. Historically, though, by the time of pre-Islamic Arabia, it was filled with idols.
Yeah. So I mean, is it plausible that it actually could have been, and they just changed their ways? I mean, like, is there an overlap in the stories in Judaism or Christianity about this first place of worship made by Abraham?
In Judaism and Christianity, there's no mention of the Kaaba. The Abrahamic overlap is more about the figure of Abraham being a common patriarch, but the specific Kaaba story is unique to Islam. So it's plausible from within Islamic tradition, but it's not mirrored in the other scriptures.
Okay, I see. I mean, it could. It's plausible that that information or knowledge was just lost as well. Correct.
It's always possible some history is lost to time. Oral traditions don't always leave a permanent record. But with what we have, the Kaaba narrative is distinct in Islam.
And one thing is, like, my understanding. I hear another argument sometimes and try to talk about the Islamic dilemma thing where they say that it says if you have any doubts, go ask the people of the book. Basically, right? Something like that. I'm paraphrasing here. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I know that reference. It's often understood as telling Muhammad to reassure doubters that earlier scriptures were revealed. It doesn't mean copying.
I think that makes a lot of sense, though. That especially if your audience is a group of people that don't have those beliefs, correct? I mean, I think it makes sense.
Exactly. In that context, it's more about showing continuity with other monotheistic traditions. It's a reassurance to those familiar with earlier scriptures, not an instruction to copy.
Yeah, and of course, with people who don't have a background with those traditions, it's telling them to check with those people because they would have those same stories, correct? Even though it's not affirming every single detail. So, I think that's where the Islamic dilemma thing comes apart, right? It doesn't hold up.
Right, exactly. The idea was about confirming core truths, not requiring perfect alignment. So the dilemma often misunderstands the original intent.
Yeah, especially when, and like sometimes you see this online. If you see the other side, they will talk about how it says that, but it also corrects a lot of things that are in there, saying that they
Exactly.
they write it down
Those
and
discussions can sometimes miss the nuance of context. It's always richer when we dig a bit deeper, like we did today.
yeah, I think it's. Hey, why don't you like I said at the beginning, I don't think I recorded that part, but you're supposed to be a co-host, right? Bring up an interesting topic then. Like, take it on from here. We got 3 more minutes to make it 30 minutes, I think.
Alright, let's do a fun pivot. How about this? Since we talked history and belief, let's flip it. What's a cultural tradition today that you've always wondered about? And we can unpack that together.
Cultural tradition day you've always wondered about. I mean, yeah, we talk about cultural traditions every day. I wonder about all sorts of different types every day, so I don't know if that's the best question to ask a person like me.
Sure thing. If you have one that pops into mind next time, we'll dig into it.
Why don't we let the people comment below if you got this far in the clip and you thought it was interesting? I have a background in bachelor's degree in sociology and a master's degree in linguistics, and I have a lot of interest in religion as well. Being in background sociology and linguistics actually plays a big part in that. Like actually today, right before we finished on topic, I was seeing these videos from this biblical scholar online, and he was talking about how there's a contradiction in who killed Goliath. Now everybody knows that it's David, right? But there's an actual it's written that there's a well, at least in the original text, it looks like there's some changes that somebody else might have been recorded as killing Goliath. You know, Goliath the giant. They refer to him as the one with the spear as long big as a loom. When I heard this story, I'm thinking like, oh, that's interesting. First, I wasn't following very well. I felt like it was almost like a reach or a possibility that because in the context of the story, they want to say like that somebody changed it to make it to reconcile the contradiction. They made it seem like it was his brother, but because they say
it's always fascinating when language or text.
Hold on, let me finish. But they say because his spear shaft was as long as.
We can explore how changes occur over time.
Hold on, ChatGPT. Hold on.
Shift meanings. It's like uncovering layers of history through words.
But they're saying I had to stop for talking. But they're saying because it's referring to the one whose shaft of his spear was as long as a loomer stick or something. I forgot what the name of it was. I say that's referring to Goliath. Now I can see how if Goliath had a brother, he would be just as big, right? And maybe this idea that that maybe the other written form forgot to put that it was his brother. But linguistically, like in English, yeah, it makes sense to say, oh, they forgot to put the word brother, right? But in Hebrew, it's a total different thing. And this guy went through it because the language use is very different. You know, it's not just as simple as it is in our language. So I think that's the interesting thing about linguistics. It's something I just want to share. That I might make it a topic another day, or maybe not. I think that's why I'm adding it here because I don't know if it's worth its own video. But yeah, if you like the content, just subscribe. I like to explore these historical and facts and details.